based of sociological perspectives on aging. I am at the University of Fechter now for about 6 years. And before that, I did a very quick, should be actually not 2012 to 2014, stint at the Bertelsmann Foundation, which is a research foundation mainly aimed at policy, doing policy-informed research or working with policymakers, especially in Brussels. So if you're interested in learning about the Brussels bubble, I'm happy to also answer your questions for that. But yeah, my research focus are more or less those three areas here. I did quite a lot on ageism in the labor market, facilitated for sure for the with the cost action, who kind of started us on this field. I do recently I do work with a focus on working pensioners, but also older workers and medium and small enterprises. And this kind of is the base of, or more or less, what we mainly do at the department I'm working at, which is at the University of Fechter. And I said that I will lift the mystery of where Fechter is. You can see it's in the north west of Germany. People who don't really know their way around. Here's Berlin, Munich would be down here, Hamburg would be here, and Fechter is kind of like where the red dot is. It's also, the red dot could be two-folded today because Fechter is also one of the highest, has one of the highest incident rates in COVID-19 right now. So could be read as both ways. The University of Fechter it's a smaller university, about 4,000 students. And the Institute of Gerontology has been established there since 2006, so quite a long time. We have 8 interdisciplinary research groups, and you can see the names of the professors of the chairs on the right-hand side. Some of them might know some of these of the people, but I work especially with the Department of Aging and Employment, or Aging and Work, and Professor Friedrich Frerichs is is the head of our department. Just a very quick kind of like a commercial block here. We are planning to do a summer school in 2021 if COVID allows it. If not, it's going to be a digital based summer school. And the idea is to get PhD students, but also early career researchers from Germany, but also from other countries together for 1 week and talk about empirical approaches to aging research. We're in the planning stages right now, so if everything is a little bit more concrete, I would like to ask you here to kind of share this information with you, because I think it could be of interest of some of you. Let's start out with more of like the my research. So the first topic I want to talk about is competence development of older workers in the German craft sector. This is my PhD project, which has been published in this beautiful, very big, very long, very German written book, which is called Betriebliches Kompetenzmanagement älterer Arbeitnehmerinnen, just to introduce some more complicated German words. Why should I talk, or why should one talk about the German craft sector, or generally what is the German craft sector? Craft sector is actually the sector which is made up of electricians, plumbers, hairdressers, so more or less any kind of work environment where you work very briefly kind of with your hands. So it's not academia, it's not educational sector, it's the craft sector. It is the second largest sector in Germany, which is it hosts about 5.5 million employees in approximately 1 million businesses. And it's one of the particularities about the sector, which is also why I think it's quite an interesting sector to study. There's a very high share of skilled workers. So about 80% of the people working in the sector have some kind of formal training, even going up to a Meister degree, which is comparable to a bachelor's degree. And also it shares some of the similarities with the general German labor market, which is then of interest for maybe from an aging research perspective. The first similarity is that it is small, the majority of it is small and medium-sized enterprises. So it's about 60% of all those companies, of those 1 million companies, have less than 5 employees. and only about 2% have more than 50, which becomes very relevant when you think of HR measurements, when you think of how to develop competencies, because those companies usually don't have any kind of formalized way of doing it because they don't have HR departments due to their size. The average age is around 40 years. It's rising as all over Germany, and it's the same, just so quick, the same age. On the right-hand side, it's something I like to show because this craft sector is also quite particular in how they view themselves. They have a very long tradition, a very strong history, a very interesting understanding of themselves. This is a commercial or like a branding of themselves they did a couple of years ago. It literally says, in the beginning there was heaven and earth and we did the rest. So you see they value themselves quite highly, and also you could probably also do a study on how female researchers are viewed in certain sectors, just because when we talk about my own experience here. Two other things I would like to point out, which kind of also gives you an idea of what's happening in not only in the German craft sector, but in the German labor market in general. We have a rising participation rate of older workers. As you can see on this hand side, some of us is due to rising employment rates of older women, but also, as you can see here, there was quite a drastic political change, or like a rethinking of how older workers should be employed in the labor market around the 2000s. So we have a lot of early exit options being cut. We have a lot of measurements being implemented that are focused on extending working lives, competence development being one of them. And as you can see, it seems to be working quite well. On the other hand side, this is, I'm sorry, I did not translate that in English. It's a study which we did in the German craft sector, which looks at trends. So what is happening in these sectors in the future? What are things companies should be mindful of? And what we did ask them, do you think this trend is relevant now? Will it be even more relevant in 5 to 10 years? And how well do you think your company is equipped for this? And if you take the digitalization of your work environment, which, I mean, even in the German craft sector, which is maybe a sector where you wouldn't firstly think about digitalization of the work environment, it's quite a big important topic. And you can see that companies think it's a big trend now. They even view it as an even bigger trend in the future, next 5 to 10 years, but they don't think that their companies are well equipped for that. So they believe they need to kind of do something with their older workers or with their workforces in general to do something about that. And this is more or less the base of where I started my research in this field. Because I was interested, and this is also where there's kind of like the bridge to the ageism perspective of my talk, is to investigate employers' attitudes towards older workers and how that affect their willingness to invest in further training or competence development of older workers, because there's often this idea that it's not, I don't get a good payback if I invest in my older workers. From this general idea, I derived several questions. I'm just going to focus on two today. Just what attitudes can we find, or what narratives do we find about older workers, and how do those narratives affect what's being offered in terms of further training? And one of the things which I became quite interesting of, and I just want to really quickly touch upon this, is how to deal with sample bias in qualitative company case studies, because it's something which you see quite often. Data was, again, the study I already mentioned before with the company owners, but also 15 qualitative in-depth case studies, which is a method where you go into companies and you interviews, site inspection, document analyze, and then all kind of bind it together as a case study. I did various, the method was quite mixed. Just the main idea for this qualitative case study was to find certain types of company behavior in regard to training of older workers. So I did a typification. To answer the questions, or just to What did I find? And there are more or less three main narratives, which contain both positive and negative aspects of age stereotypes, which believe you all are quite familiar with. And these affect how, and these narratives, or the dominance of certain narratives within the companies, then affect how much training is offered, for example, for older workers. So there's a narrative of they value older workers' skills and experience, which is especially something which comes into high importance in the craft sector. Here on the right-hand side, you can see an interview cutout where we can see that the company owner whom I interviewed there said that these competencies of Mr. O, who has been working for the company for 45 years, cannot be replaced. So they have a very high value of older workers' skills. The second one, which is also tending towards the positive part, is they value them as assets in terms of the relationship with customers. Also, they have very specific roles within the companies, which are quite difficult to replace when retire. But also one of the narratives which I found was the concern of potential health restrictions. So companies are concerned, or company owners, I have to say, are concerned about older workers having health restrictions. But there's quite an interesting debate on how they deal with that. So, for example, you find companies who say, yes, we have this health restriction. This is a problem, but I can't do anything about it. So older workers are something which I don't invest in because of this restriction. But there are also other companies I found, or I interviewed, or I found in my typification, who said, yes, I do accept these health restrictions, but I believe that as a company, I am not only, I'm supposed to do something about this because I need to do this, because I need to keep my skilled workers employed, but also it is my kind of like my company's conscious to do that. So it's a very different way of how to deal with these narratives. The second question here, you can actually see me on one of the sides. So research can be very, very hand-on if you want to. The research question too was the selection bias. What I found, or what we discussed quite a lot in our department, is that when doing qualitative company case studies, even though if you try to do your best in the theoretical sampling, there's often some kind of a selection bias in there. These might be due to recruitment strategies. For example, you start working with companies you already know, or who have been somehow become of interest to you because they have talked about being a best practice in terms of how to deal with the older workers. But also maybe when you're doing a PhD project or any kind of short-term project, there might be constrictions due to time and resources, but then end in not such a great selection, or not the sample composition might be a little bit off, let's just put it this way. And in my case, or my PhD project, I found this to be the case, or I feared that this would be the case, that there were only kind of like beautiful, shiny, blinking examples of how to deal well with older workers, and no maybe cases where companies are actually not doing so great. So in order to kind of prove my own sample, I worked with theoretical types as a control group. So what I did is more or less, I ex ante, so before I went into into the analysis, I constructed theoretical types of what companies that should or could be in the field, and then kind of use them as a control group. If you're interested in that, I can talk a little bit about more that later. And yes, in my case, I actually found proof that there was some kind of a selection bias in my sample, and that there is need for further research, and maybe even going into a more like a quantitative setting and trying to see if what I found in my PhD project is actually holds true on a bigger scale. Yeah, this was very briefly, quickly about my PhD project. Now I would like to talk about the topic of ageism and labor market integration, and I will just focus on two papers here really quick, and also I'm just going to very quickly touch upon those papers. If you have more question about that, please feel free to ask them. And also, I would like to say that this work is based on work with other authors, especially Wouter and Moritz, which have been with me since cross-section and are also early career stage researchers. So why should one look at ageism and labor market integration? I mean, I'm a labor market researcher, so I kind of look at it because I'm interested in that. But also discrimination, as we know, is quite very common in labor market integration of unemployed. So meaning being people who are outside of the labor market are being discriminated based on several causes, and for them it's very difficult to come back into the labor market. And the causes can be age, which was our kind of starting point, but also it can be gender or maybe ethnical background. And when we started looking into this field, and especially from age discrimination or general discrimination in labor market integration, we found that there's quite a big focus on a very specific interaction within this process of a person coming back into the labor market. And what I mean by this is there's quite a lot of research done on the point where an unemployed person maybe interacts with a job seeker, where an unemployed job seeker interacts with potential employers. Here, for example, you find quite a lot of research in this classical CV experiment style, but I also believe some of your PhD projects are in this area. And this is great to know a lot about what's happening there. But what we argue is that this is actually just one very small moment in the whole process of integrating somebody back into the labor market. And we base our idea here on the concept of transitional labor markets and the outplace model, and say that labor market integration does not consist of the single event, but it's actually more of a transition of a person through several phases, from being unemployed to being rightfully back into the labor market. And within these phases, there's a sequence of interactions with various labor market actors. And in each of these interactions, there's potential for discrimination. Sounds quite technical. Let me just show why what we did with that. Just a lesson. So we said, therefore, we saw that a systematic view on discrimination in labor market integration is needed. And we developed a process model in this paper, which I just gonna take you through very, very quickly. So the idea is that a person who is unemployed and wants to be reintegrated in the labor market starts out at this side of the of the phases, and then goes through all those phases until the end, until stabilization, so it's back into stable employment. And within these phases, he or she might be interacting with various actors, for example, companies and employers. I already talked about this, something which will happen a lot in phase 3, where you do job interviews and then you might be discriminated upon or not, but also intermediate organizations with something, for example, like job centers, or also further training institutions which might not offer the same amount of courses or placements for all the workers. That could also be a base for discrimination. But also the social and the policy sphere can be an actor which then discriminates towards a certain subgroup within the labor market. For example, when you don't offer the same amount of policy measurements, or if you don't offer any policy measurements to a certain specific vulnerable labor market group, like older unemployed, this could be just cause for discrimination. And now you probably, or maybe think this is a great idea, but why should somebody use this model? In the paper where we developed the model, we actually use it as a map for not a systematic, but a scoping review for existing research on the topic of labor market ageism in labor market integration. And what we found, for example, is that there's a lot of research done in this third phase. There's not a lot of research done in the fifth phase, or there's a lot of research done in the how these two actors deal with each other, but there's very few done on how an individual interacts with intermediate organizations. So this is something kind of a standing point, and I hopefully sometimes in the future I would like to develop this idea into actually like a research proposal. But right now we're kind of using it as a tip-off for several other research projects. One being the next paper I'm presenting right now, which is a paper published within European Societies, also again with a great group of early career researchers. And this paper specifically looks at the interaction about older unemployeds and how are they viewed by society or by people within society, because the idea behind it is if they are viewed as something which we should deal with in a more strict way than, for example, younger unemployed people, this could also be a course of age discrimination. So the idea which we started with this paper is actually derives from the deserving literature. And the question we asked is, are older people perceived, or older unemployed people, I have to say, are perceived as more deserving of help and also are punished less for not accepting a job? The idea behind this is that certain subgroup, as I said, derives from the deservingness literature, certain subgroups are considered to be more deserving of social benefits, such as unemployment money, than others. And we know from research that older individuals are seen as one of the highest group in terms of deserving social benefits, and they're followed by the support of the sick and disabled. So there's this idea of older people being more deserving to be taken care of, or to be accepting or receiving social benefits. And we wanted to test this in our study. And this is, it's quite an extensive study. There's, I believe, 7 hypotheses. This is only one I'm talking to you today about. And we, the hypothesis was that generally older unemployed will be published less when refusing a job offer than younger unemployed individuals, right? So that it's kind of like a positive age discrimination, what's happening here. And how did we do that? We actually used a survey experiment, which was carried out in the European Social Survey Wave 8. And we looked at a total of 21 countries. And the dependent variable here is, or the question, there's a question being asked, I'll show you in a second how it actually looks like within the questionnaire, is how an unemployed person should be sanctioned when turning down a job. So, and the response options which was given to within the questionnaire was like, this person should lose all of his or her employment benefits, lose about half, lose about a small part, or lose none. And we used, well, what's happening in the survey experiment, they actually use age vignettes, which looks a little bit like this. Here you see the age neutral version on the left-hand side, where there again is the question already kind of shortened up and said, and here are the various sub-questions asked, and this is an age neutral form. So there is the person who has been asked what should happen to that person, or how should they cut their unemployment benefit, has no age. Then there is 1/3 of the people would answer this question. 1/3 of the questionnaire would be asked with this person being 50 and above. And the other one, the last third, would get asked this question with the age vignette 20 to 25 years. So what did we find? First, we find that there's actually a support of sanctioning, and the harshest is in Italy, Norway, Poland, Spain, and Slovenia. And the lowest is actually in Germany, Lithuania, Estonia, and Austria. And also, it's not on there. It's also quite interesting that stricter sanctioning is also higher in countries with higher unemployment rates, just to give you something to think about. And when we then look at the age comparison, we see there's actually a younger, moderate trend for younger employed facing stricter sanctions, whereas older unemployed are punished less for not accepting a job. The exceptions here are Portugal and Spain, which could be explained by the high unemployment rates when this study was carried out. But there is some moderate support for our hypotheses. And it is I think, quite an interesting case or interesting example for one of these social interactions I talked about earlier. Now, leaving the unemployed, I would like to talk to you about working pensioners in Germany. Why would one talk about German pensioners in Germany? It is something which is rising in numbers, and also something I'm actually currently interested in working on. Some of the research here is based on this paper, which we just have published with the European Journal of Aging, and it's also, again, with a great team of early career researchers. So working pensioners are those people who work past their statutory retirement age whilst receiving a pension. So we have people who actually are entitled to go into retirement, but they choose, or the question is if it's willing or not willing, to choose to keep on working while receiving a pension. In Germany, and this is the interesting case, this increase is relatively steep, or has been very steep in the last couple, like 10 or decades, and it has been one of the highest amongst European countries. So for example, in 2019, there is roughly about 1.3 million working pensioners in Germany. That's an increase of about 45% since 2010, and even 73% since 2005. And when we look at the motives, or when we look at why people do this, there's often this kind of divide, at least in Germany, very strongly in the public discourse, but also a little bit in the scientific discourse, that this group has to be divided between those who have to work, like they have the financial need to work, for example, due to old age poverty, but also those who want to work, which are often, or have been dubbed in the past as silver workers or silver careers, kind of these people who don't want to or can't stop, who will never stop working. And we became quite interested in that. If this is the only motives, or if we need to have a little bit more specific view on that. And so our research interest, again, was the motives that people state that plan to work in retirement. And we tried to answer these questions using a very interesting study in also a German data set, which sadly is not being continued, only 3 waves. But it's a study on transition and old age potential, which is actually for a labor market researcher with a gerontological focus. It's a very, very nice study. We've done quite some great things with it. It actually asks older workers and pensioners about this transition process from work into retirement. And it's also, we are also able to kind of follow people into retirement through the waves. What we did, we specifically looked at the motives and which are being asked in the study. And we did a latent class analysis, and very briefly, again, the results here. We found that there's 4 groups of people who have a kind of like a complex motives for staying on in working in retirement. The first one is actually the financially driven group, which are those who probably need to work, and which is also here one should think about social inequality. If you need to work, it's actually aligned with your willingness to work. The second group is more the status-driven group. So here we find workers or pensioners or older workers who plan to work during retirement, whom are whom status is very important for, that like to kind of be acknowledged in their field of work. And the group 3 or 4 are actually the ones I became most interested in. It's the group who stated, oh, my main motives for working is actually to stay in contact with my colleagues, and also because I have fun doing work, which I mean, it's great. But number 4, just to round this up, is the generativity-driven group. So those are the people who state that they like to work with other or younger cohorts, that they like to transfer their knowledge, that they're interested in sharing or just being in regular contact with younger colleagues. And these 2 groups, I find this quite interesting, that because what we see here that not without the financially or even the status argument, there seems to be some kind of argument for staying in contact with your peers or with your social networks at work. And this kind of started me thinking on this a little bit further. And so right now, and this is probably kind of going to be the end of the working pensioner part, is I started to work at a research grant coming from this idea of these social networks and how they affect retirement transitions. This is actually going to be a project which brings me back to a more company-based and qualitative approach. And I'm quite interested in, or I was interested, or I am interested right now, to investigate the impact of social relations and networks with colleagues and coworkers in one's decision to work into retirement. Because when you look at retirement research, there's also a lot of research done in terms of how does a big or a small family affect your retirement timing, how you retire in regard to your spouse or to your partner, how grandchildren or even a care obligation might affect your retirement timing. But rarely, or very rarely, there has been done research in Germany, at least, to look at the influence of social networks and relationships at work, because one could argue if you don't like your coworkers, you're probably not going to stay on. This is the idea behind. I will be doing this with actually an interview study and network mapping, and also something which I believe might be of interest for some of you who in the future might plan to, write your own research proposal. And this is actually to the idea of making your qualitative data available for secondary research. And there's very few, at least in my knowledge, in Germany, there's only very few options you can do this. One is the Quali service, which is actually a service where they archive your qualitative data, for example, your videos or your interview transcripts, and make them accessible for other researchers to reevaluate them with their own research questions in mind. And they also have quite an interesting way of anonymizing these data. But yeah, so maybe this is something of interest you can think towards doing in the future, so we have a better data set for qualitative researchers. So with this, I'm actually already done with the kind of research part of my talk. And I would like to talk to you about some very general remarks, as I mentioned earlier, which are very, very subjective and very, very out of my point of view, and also out of my profession point of view. First, I would like to talk about academia in Germany a little bit. If you're interested, for example, to coming to Germany or work in Germany, there are some opportunities for you, but also something where you should be aware or mindful of, at least in my own opinion. First, academia in Germany is mainly organized around universities and research centers. These are by far not all of the important research centers I could think of, but some of them are quite interesting when you're doing aging research. For example, the DEW, which is the Economical Research Institute in Germany. I'm not sure if this is the right translation. They have a very interesting data set, the socioeconomic panel, which might be of interest for some of you, but also the DZA, or German Center of Gerontology, who has a new homepage since 2 weeks, which now is also being in English. So you're actually able to see what's going on there. And they host also very interesting data sets maybe for your research. For example, the German Aging Survey, which has been running quite long. Also the German Survey of Volunteering. And also more recently, there's a study on 80 plus, so on very old people and how they, how they live in Germany. So something maybe of interest of you. One of the things I also would like to point out, Germany is very specific in terms of the language we use. It's you've seen my PhD project was in German, and it was a book, which might sound weird for some ears, but it's actually quite something which you see quite often in Germany, because in Germany, or the German academia, especially maybe sociology, the working language is German, or still is German, which you can see in publication records, for example. There's, and also there's also a lot of German researchers, or even early career researchers, who publish in German and English. Sometimes some of them find this quite weird, but let me just give you a very quick example why this could be happening. German academia, it's quite big. For example, if you look at the German Sociological Association Congress, which is a big sociology congress every 2 years, there's 4,000 people attending this conference. So this is the same amount as at the European level, for example, the Gerontology Congress. So it's quite a big research community. So you will find that, which then might be a problem for you if you want to come work in Germany and you don't speak German. But it's getting more internationalized, but you still find people only publishing in German. Also, something I would like to talk about is employment status in Germany. For example, myself, I'm a postdoc now. I work at I have something what you call the qualification-based employment status. So I have a contract for 5 years, which is considered quite long. But there's also funding-based employment, stipend-based employment, and teaching-based employment. And usually these are 3, 4, 5 years, and they come with quite a specific set of how to say, they're quite specific just in the way they're set up. For example, if you have a teaching-based position in Germany, that can mean you have to teach up to 9 classes a week, which is a lot, especially when you are finishing your PhD. These are all employment status below a professor position. So this is something, and also a stipend or stipendium or a grant-based stipend is something there are some of these, they're getting more popular, but be very aware that a lot of these stipends, you have to pay your own health insurance. That then they look very attractive when you start out, because what the pay grade is quite nice. But then you have to pay your own health insurance, and that makes these stipends often not very attractive. Also, sometimes they are not they're only offered for people coming from the European Union, and it's quite difficult for international or non-European Union members to kind of get these stipends. So just be very mindful, but also if you have questions about that, I'm happy to also later in a couple months, if you see something, please just reach out to me. I'm happy to answer your questions. Be careful is also, if you plan to stay in Germany forever and be a professor there, there's very few tenured positions below a professorship. And also there's there's literally no in-house tenure. So for example, I am a postdoc. I did my PhD in Vechta. I did do my postdoc in Vechta, but I will not be able to become a professor in Vechta. I have to change universities to do that. And maybe some of you wondered why all your German colleagues are kind of jumping around universities. This is the main reason why this is happening, because it's not allowed to tenure people from in-house in most German universities. Just three more things I would like to point out is there's the German Association for Gerontology. It is small, but it is, I think it's quite active right now. It's happening some really interesting things, especially for early career researchers. There are pre-conference workshops, there are conferences happening, and they have kind of a new understanding of supporting early career researchers. So maybe something for you to be interested in that. Also, what here on the right-hand side is the German Journal for Gerontology and Geriatrics, which might be an interesting outlet for some of you for your research, especially when you're doing qualitative research, you're allowed to publish in English in that, although the homepage is primarily in German, but it's possible to publish in English. Yeah, just to maybe if that's interested of you. Also, if you don't find a stable employment in Germany, but you still want to come, maybe do a research stay, one of the opportunities which I highly recommend is actually looking at the German Academic Exchange Service, which is more or less a funding institution in Germany for research. And they allow, or you can apply there as an international or non-European or even non-German to funding to come for a couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months, even up to a year. And they have quite interesting programs which might be of interest to some of you. Yeah. I will finish my talk just with some general do's and don'ts. And again, this is my very, very, very subjective opinion. So if you ask somebody else, you might be seeing this completely differently. I found in my own experience or in my career so far, found it very valuable to connect and work with other early career researchers, especially in terms of corporations or trustworthy corporations here. If you want to publish jointly, or if you want to, apply for conference symposia, it's very important to find people you can work with who are trustworthy and also who are mindful of deadlines, again, because deadlines is something which happens quite a lot when you're publishing. Yeah, I was lucky to do several research stays. Some of them were funded by Cost Action, actually, where then publications came out of it. For example, this process model was developed by me and Moritz and Wouter while I was staying in Aalborg University. This is the first time we talked about it, and now it's out and about. There's early career networks. I mean, most of you have already actually a part of a network, which is great. But also there's some really good opportunities to join networks on social media, or even the other platforms. I also found it quite good to present and talk about my work via in symposiums or talks, either in a formal setting on conferences or informal, if you're able to do that. Again, conference, summer school in Fechter maybe next year, but also method workshops are something great to do. Also, I would suggest to think outside the box. Liat, we did this talk, which I actually found in the aftermath quite helpful. I used them a lot for teaching, but also they were kind of like a door opener for me to various other media appearances, because people saw that and then contacted me. And it's also always important to talk about your work maybe in newspapers, or even I was in the German TV on ageism, which was great experience. Yeah, and last not but least, I called it, so build your own portfolio. I think it's when you're interested in becoming a professor, you should be aware about that the committees who are selecting professors, at least in Germany, looking on very specific portfolios. It's, you have to have publications and talks and all these, outputs of research outputs, but also what's becoming quite more important, at least in the committees I have been a member of, which as a postdoc, does happen sometimes that you're a member of these committees that appoint professors, is that they're looking also for teaching experience. So if you haven't had the chance to teach anything, try to find these opportunities, but also maybe look at teaching qualifications, because it becomes more and more important for these committees to just see that you not only have been teaching, but that you actually know a little bit about how good teaching should look like, especially maybe when it comes to digital teaching. So this is something I did and I found quite helpful, not only for teaching, but also for my portfolio. Again, research and travel grants becomes, especially in Germany, the postdoc is kind of like divided into, let's say, two phases. So right in the beginning, you do a lot of, or it's asked of you to kind of broaden your field and publish and maybe work yourself, look into new fields you're becoming interested of, like my working pensioners, for example. But then in the second part of your postdoc, after maybe 2 or 3 years, it is expected of you to get your own research grants and employ your own PhD students and stuff like that. So if you have a good idea and you think this can maybe turn into like a research proposal, kind of keep thinking about that, because at one point you should be thinking about this in a very, very specific, do this way. Just be visible inside and outside of your field. I do believe this is something becomes even more important in research. You can like it or not. People need to know who you are and where you're at in order to find not only your work, but also find you interesting for being somebody they would like to have at their university. And the last one is a very personal note, which I would like to make, if you can, pay it forward. What do I mean by that? I was very fortunate to be offered several very great research opportunities, being at cost action, or also being part of research groups, working for the WH project or whatever. And I learned so much from that, and I think it is, if you can, so pay it forward. It can be in small phases, like inviting students to come along to a conference with you, which we did at the Fechter last year. And now 2 out of the 3 students who came to Göteborg with us are now actually PhD students, which is great. And also maybe you can, if you're writing a paper and you see somebody who's just started out, have him be on the team, and just so they learn how this process works. This is just a very personal idea. So if you can, pay it forward. And with that, I would like to say thank you. And yeah, I'm interested in your questions.
Thank you very much. Questions, anyone? So Yola whispered that I should mention the cost action. You also mentioned it, but I think it's really a great opportunity for students to kind of network and develop their interests. So definitely I recommend that everyone look for a cost action that is relevant to their research and try to see if they can be part of it. I think now it's a little more challenging. But at some point we will be able to move around and see people face to face. I think this is a very good opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I did not talk about COVID. Also, if you're interested about something and how COVID is happening in the German labor market, I can talk about this too. But yeah, this is it's problematic, but I do believe hopefully at one point we will be able to see each other again. So
yes, thank you. Do people have any questions to Laura?
Yeah, I would have a general question. So thank you, Laura, for the presentation. It was quite interesting. I would have so you're working on age discrimination, ageism now for a longer time, and I would be interested in your opinion on how is the general awareness towards age discrimination in the labor market in Germany among employers, among employees, but also on the policy or political agenda.
Yeah, thank you for this question. How can I say this? So I do believe that aging or age discrimination has been a topic in Germany for quite a long time, not only in research, but also in the public sphere, just because Germany is aging so fast. And so if you look back at the first, for example, national report on aging, it's actually is quite a long time ago when even policymakers started thinking about this. So I do believe there is a general understanding of that. But then having transferred this understanding on the company level, it's actually quite a problem, because just from my very small study in the craft sector, you can see that there's very little knowledge about aging processes, and this is also, I find also often like the base for age discrimination happening, because if you don't know how people age, and that is maybe it's an individual process, and not all people are going to be sick and ill and unable to work, then there's a big case for age discrimination, it can happen quite often. And I do believe this is still the case, that on company level the knowledge is not great. It should be better. And maybe a third thing is we have a very, very interesting discrimination talk right now on age discrimination in general, not against older workers, but in general due to COVID. Because we have this, I mean, probably it's the same in various countries. There's this, there are specific vulnerable group. We need to take care of them. We need to prevent them to get this disease or this infection. And this is various researchers, and also I know Liat worked with for example, Hans-Peter Wahl, are very very mindful that this discussion on how older people are vulnerable group is not actually negatively affecting age perceptions in Germany in general. And I do believe that this could be the case, and it could be something which in 5 to 10 years you might be seeing that there is kind of we're backtracking towards a more negative age view on older people in Germany, because the discussion is massive. If you speak German or listen or hear or understand German, there's quite an interesting podcast from Hans-Werner Wahl, who is a psychologist in Germany, who talks about this topic. You can find this podcast via the German Gerontological homepage, and it's a 1-hour podcast. It's really interesting to maybe.
Can I ask a second question?
Yes, go ahead.
Sure.
Then I have a more specific question about your research on manual labor and Handwerk in general. So have you come across differences in the case of gender? So I think, so my assumption would be that manual labor jobs, despite there's it's getting more differentiated, there's still quite a huge bias. What is considered to be a more female job and what is to consider a man's job, and are there differences between the different sectors where there are more women or where there are more men employed, and when it comes to age discrimination?
Well, yeah, there is actually. So my PhD project was part of a research project, which in the way it was set out only looked at jobs within the craft sector which are very man dominated, for example, electricians, motives, plumbers, and metal workers, where you hardly find any women at all. And but there are other craft sectors, for example, hairdressers or sewing. I'm not sure how to translate that correctly. It's very female dominated, and there is some studies done but it's, again, what I probably did not mention is that there's actually not a lot of studies done on the sector in general. So I could probably count out every 10 studies outside of the one we did, my PhD in the project, which actually dealing with this sector. And there's one on women in the hairdressing trade, and they are actually facing age discrimination problems as well, because it's also one of these professions where you age quite bad, because you're standing a lot, your hands are working constantly, and it's something where you have big health problems. And so there's this, but it's just one very small study done by a colleague, who they say that the perception of women in this field is especially bad because it's within the beauty sector, but also it's high demand, physical demand. This is maybe something I can say about that. Yeah, but it's, again, if you want to come to Germany and research on the craft sector, be my guest. We need a lot of research on that, because we literally don't know. I mean, we don't really know the real age structure in this sector. When I did my PhD, I called the umbrella organization, which is the Deutsche Handwerkstag, and I called them. I was like, so I need to, where do I find this information? And they were like, oh, we don't have it, but if you can get it, that would be great to let us know. So it's quite, yeah, just a small story on the side. I see there are more questions.
I have a question.
Hi.
I don't know. Hi, Laura. I don't know.
Hi, nice to see you.
I am the first or
sure.
not in the line. I actually have more than one. I think your talk was very interesting and also made me think a lot about early stage researcher and like professional perspective and so. Well, one question that is related to your research, because you talked about these theoretical types as controlling qualitative research. And well, I don't know if you want to talk a bit more about this, but I do qualitative research. It's definitely another type of research. But I think this selection bias in choosing especially companies, it's clearly there. So if you have any advice on how to overcome that somehow, or how to convince company to actually engage in research also. And then in how you described also your career path so far, I see that you have this expertise in both qualitative and quantitative method, which I think is very surprising from my point of view, because I find it very hard to combine and kind of know to do both in a good way. So I would like to, if you want to tell your experience, how you can do both and how can you mix them. And then I have another point for discussion again, which maybe, I don't know if it's interesting for this audience, but something that I was thinking while you were talking about the Germany academia, that's something that I see as an international researcher based outside my home country, or the country that I talk my mother tongue, let's say, that I think it's way more challenging to develop probably a professional career when you move out for your PhD. And or I don't know if you have any kind of suggestion for us that we started actually our PhD in another country because we are in an ITN that asked us to move. Yes, these are some questions. I don't know, maybe if it's too long.
Okay, I try. I try to answer them briefly, but maybe I have to re-ask you the questions. For the first one, let's start with the easy. You asked about approaches to companies and how do we get them involved. Yeah, this is a problem which our department, or especially my boss, has been in this field of research for quite a long time, and he's still struggling with that. I found it quite helpful to actually go via kind of like meta organizations, like if there is some kind of I don't know how to say that, on the sector level or even on the regional level, there's sometimes this networks or these groupings of companies who work together on whatever field it is, and then go via these organizations is always very helpful. But also I would always definitely ask, when I go into a company, I would always ask, so this was amazing, this was great, do you know somebody who would be also a good person to talk to? And then you can also ask about contrastive companies. So, but it's difficult, especially to get these, let's just call them like the bad cases, like the ones who don't do much. It's very, very difficult to get hands on them if you don't have the resources to actually go extensively searching for them, which in a PhD project might not be the case. This was actually something which when I started my PhD, I did my company case studies, and then I thought I had a plan, a theoretical sampling. This is how I do this. And then when I started analyzing them, I was like, this is something, this still feels off, even though I was quite careful with selecting my cases. Then I talked to our professor for methods, and I asked him, so do you have any suggestions of what I can do just to deal with that? And he actually told me, if you're doing a typification, which is a very specific way of analyzing company case studies, you can also just do qualitative content analysis and just see what's happening there. But I was interested in finding, the sociologist in me wanted to do types because that's what we do. And here the idea was to actually work with theoretical types. What is that? The idea behind that is that you actually go into theories that explain company behavior towards a certain thing. For example, you use human capital theory to explain investing in human capital. And the theory allows you to kind of stretch out pull out every possible way a company could act. So it could either invest or not invest, to make it a very simple understanding. And then I combined several theoretical approaches into these types. And then I could, for example, find, okay, by theory, there should be companies who are not investing in the companies, but in my sample, there are only companies who are investing. So I could at least then say, okay, the theory tells me that there's potential for missing cases in a very, very uncertain way. Not uncertain. This is just I don't think it's like it's still not the best way to deal with this sampling issues, but at least it's a way to be aware of what's happening there and trying to at least discuss other potential cases, which then might not be in your sample. And in my research, it was exactly that. I could say, because theory tells me there should be these other cases, which I did not find. So I could then, in my results, show, okay, I find these types, but there is potential for other types as well. So this is not the final product because theory tells me otherwise in a very simplistic way, but yeah. The second question was qual to quant. Okay, this is actually an interesting. So I started out with qualitative research also because at our department, this is mainly the way what's happening. Especially my professor, he's very big on qualitative company case studies, which is actually the reason why I asked him to be my supervisor and then switched from Bertelsmann Foundation to the University of Fechter, which was not, I actually had to Google where Fechter is first before going there. Because he was the one who was doing qualitative research on company based in Germany with all the workers. And so I wanted to work with him. And I started out with, within this project then on craft sector, on the craft sector, which is where I did a lot of the qualitative work. But we also had some quantitative sub projects within the big project. And I became quite interested in that. And then actually the big step was when I started working with Wouter and Moritz, who are both diehard quantitative early career researchers. And we started out with the first publication of the paper working together, which was then ended up in Liat's book on ageism. And this was like the beginning of working with people coming from a complete different kind of methodological field. And then they asked me, hey, do you want to, write a paper together again? And this is more or less what happens is that I started working with a lot of quantitative researchers, was very shy in the beginning to say anything about quantitative research, because I did not train in that well, so the more papers we wrote or the more projects we talked about, the more I became interested in that. And right now I'm actually in the midst of getting myself more knowledgeable in this field. So I'm taking a lot of methods classes especially on longitudinal data and stuff like that. So this kind of my competence in this regard followed a little bit my path, and but I still. And actually this year, just to finish that, I actually also started working in the mixed methods field. Especially me and a colleague of mine, we were offering a mixed methods workshop at several conferences. We have been offering it at several conferences. It will be also at the summer school next year, where we kind of combine these two fields. Yeah, and the last one was tips for PhDs who move out of the country. I did not really understand. Okay, maybe you could repeat.
Yeah, no, because I was thinking that you give this overview on Germany. So I guess you're German as like mother tongue and origin. And so you stayed in your home country. And I think it is maybe more challenging, but maybe I'm wrong, for people as us, because we are part of an IT, well, not all in the call, but we are part of an ITN. So we moved for our PhD outside our home country where we don't speak the language well. So if from your point of view, it is more challenging, or what could be, I don't know, some like advices for us that moved out, how to construct a career.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, now I understand what you're talking about. Yeah, I think it's more challenging. I mean, my first job after university was actually also right outside in Brussels. I don't speak French, and Brussels is very French for whoever one of you who worked there. So that was quite also an interesting move. I do believe it's a very, actually, in my opinion, it's a great opportunity for you to go abroad and do your PhD abroad. It's something I kind of wanted to do, but then after 1 year in Brussels, I kind of wanted to go back home, also due to private reasons, and I did not even consider doing my PhD outside of Germany, which I do believe is a great chance. But I do understand if one point you want to move back to your home country. What I found quite interesting is, or what I find important is to kind of stay in contact with the kind of like your research scene back home, if you can put it like that. So visit conferences there. Try to maybe initiate cooperations with researchers, early career researchers, stayed in your respective countries. Maybe do a research stay in your. I mean, you're outside. You can do a research stay back there. But I wouldn't find it. I think it's actually more of a great opportunity to actually be able to do that, because I had to get my external experience via research stays, which I had to apply for, because this is also something which they want to see in your portfolio, at least in my opinion, that you have this experience outside of this one national academia scene. So you actually are in kind of like an advantage there, maybe. So don't think it as a bad thing. I think it's amazing.
Thanks, and sorry for the time I took.
No, that's fine. I got time. Any more questions?
So thank you, Laura. It was nice seeing you online.
Nice seeing you too. Hopefully see you again sometime soon.
Definitely, yeah. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll be in touch.
Okay, see you. Bye.
And I didn't ask you, is it okay to share your video?
Sure.
Sure, thank you.
Sure.
So I recorded, but I forgot to ask, so.
No, that's fine, that's fine. Okay, thank you, Eva. So, and again, if you have any more questions or something, just send me a mail. I'm happy to answer and help where I can. And have a good rest of the year and good break over the year. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to thank you as well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
No.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Ola. Take care.
You know, I'm working on it today, so that's why I'm working on that. So
okay.
I stopped the recording first. I think that you have to coding first before leaving.
No, I'm fine. I can just turn it off. It will be
You
fine.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, because I know that it's the problem with, but I'm working on today and it's different.
I think it was a good session.
Take rest.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.